Hi, and welcome to our new video series called She's There, Look Closer. I'm Sandra Crawford Williamson, the COO of Forward, and I'm joined today by the founder of Forward, Diane Pattison, and also the author of Work, Love, Pray, and the director of leadership development at Western Seminary, Jim Hislop. We're so glad you guys are here with us today.
Thank you.
We really want to have a wonderful dialogue about women in the church. The dynamics have really changed over the last 30 years. Demographics, economic stability, all the things that are making women in the church look a little differently than they did years ago. And today we want to talk about some statistics that might help pastors understand this demographic a little more. She's there in your church, just look closer and you'll understand how to keep her there. So Diane, why don't you start by talking a little bit about the statistics and how they've changed over the years?
Great, Sandra. I mean, it's really dramatic what's happened. And I'm really going to talk about sort of over the last 30 years, these three demographic shifts that I'll mention have moved about 30 percentage points. So just a huge change. So we're going to talk about women in the workforce. We're going to talk about women gaining advanced degrees and women who are primary breadwinners. So when you look at women in the workforce today, you have around 50% of the workforce are women. And the really outstanding fact that we have to really focus on is 70% of women with children under 18 are in the workforce today. And that's 2010 census data.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, a huge shift. A lot of people don't understand that.
In fact, the numbers indicate the more children a family has, the more likely the woman is to be in the workforce. Isn't that right?
Exactly. Secondly, when you look at advanced degrees, and I'm sure you're seeing it here at Western, that over 50% of advanced degrees today are going to women. Well, 30 years ago, that was 6%. And a dramatic shift. I mean, women are going to use their education at some point in their life. It may not be continuous from when they graduate, but they're going to use it. And then last of all, primary breadwinners. Today, 40% of families, the woman is the primary breadwinner. And again, that's U.S. Census 2010, reported by Pew Research, and was cover of Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Washington Post about 2 years ago, because that was so it was a statistic that really was not known before. So just
no one really
amazing
talks
shifts.
about it. It's unbelievable. Yeah, the university changes, I'm sure you've seen, Jim. I mean, the statistics today show that across America, 60% of university students are female. 60%, that's all degree levels. And so women are going to university like never before. They're graduating like never before with degrees and going back and supporting their families. And so that's the topic we want to get into today, is what is that changing demographic doing then to the church? The person sitting in the church looks a little differently than she did some time ago. And Diane, you speak a lot about what that means to corporations and their revenues. So do you want to touch on that?
Well, it's huge from a corporate standpoint, for corporations to know how to reach that woman in the workplace, because they're consuming, typically they're making 80% of the decisions around consumption. So corporations have to focus on it. They also have to focus on it because if corporations aren't reaching half of the raw material out there that they can bring in as an employee on their team, they're not as competitive as someone that knows how to bring in women to their company.
Absolutely. And the numbers show that when you lose an employee, it takes anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 to replace that employee and get them up and trained, sort of the productivity loss that you have. So companies really need to understand this changing demographic as well.
Exactly.
And then there's the church,
Then
right,
there's the
Jim?
church,
Then there's
yes.
the church. So, why do you think, as you are out there training the future pastors of America and raising the awareness of pastors that are already out there with churches, why do you think these shifts are so critical for them to be aware of, and why we're here to try and help them understand it a little better?
Well, not only am I doing what I'm doing now, but I actually was a pastor for 38 years prior to doing this. And the shift is obvious in the church. With that many more women in the workforce, number one, that decreases the amount of flexible time they've got to be involved in the church. But it also changes the demographic in terms of who's making decisions in the home about the family and their involvement in the church, I think. I think my experience is that if the mom comes to church, the children probably come with her. And if there's one person in the family missing more regularly than anyone else, it's the father. So mom's making a lot of significant decisions about family's involvement in the church.
I think that's right. I think if mom decides to get up on Sunday morning and make pancake breakfast and watch cartoons instead, that the family probably doesn't make it to church.
Yeah, we know, you notice that when you have a women's retreat or a men's retreat, who actually makes it to church with the family. It's kind of interesting to watch. But the other factor the other thing that's changed is who's making financial decisions as well. And if in fact it's true that women are making 70 to 80% of the financial decisions in the home, and the church is losing these women for who knows what reason, then that impacts the financial situation in the church as well. So it's got a very practical implication to it, and for pastors to actually see who is in their congregation and understand who is in their congregation. I think it changes the way you preach, and I think it changes the way you involve people in leadership. If you see these women who are now much more educated than they used to be, making corporate decisions, and then they come to church, and what are they asked to do there? They're asked to do things that don't require that kind of expertise often. And when
we
they've
joke
got
about
this
it.
professionalism,
We say we're asked to make tater tot casseroles and work in the nursery.
Well, I didn't want to make that joke, but since you made it, that's
Yes.
that's exactly true. What happens, and
Yes.
we've got women out there running corporations and large companies and in C-suite positions in lots of these corporations. And when they come to church, we're not utilizing that incredible skill.
I always tell people you
We
don't want
lost.
my casserole, so you know that is definitely
Right.
not my gift, and
Right.
so that's a really good point.
But to utilize your leadership strengths and the skills that you have that you use in a business world, I think could make a huge difference in most churches.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I'm particularly in agreement coming from consumer marketing. You know, the data shows that women control 80% of the household spending, which includes charitable giving.
Right.
And so it's
right.
really key to make sure that she is engaged, she feels
Right.
spoken to by her church, so that when she's partnering with her husband to make those decisions, that the church is just as
Right.
important as it has always been.
Exactly.
So what about, Jim, how do you think this redefines the mission field?
Well, the mission field has changed just generally, very significantly in the last 40 or 50 years. When I was growing up in the church and in early leadership in the church, whenever you thought of the mission field, it was always somewhere overseas.
I always say where you had to get shots, right?
You had to get shots in
Right.
a visa to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I heard it said not too long ago that the greatest mission field in the world today is the marketplace. And the most neglected place is the marketplace. And I think that's true when you think about the number of hours that people spend at work as opposed to in the church. I read some statistics. I think it's about, for the average life of a person who's been involved in the church all their life, they spend about 10,000 hours maybe over the course of a lifetime in the church, but they'll spend 100,000 hours in the marketplace.
I've heard 6 to 1
Yeah,
to 10 to 1,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, it's amazing.
In fact, we will often hear people say, if someone gets up on Sunday morning and wants to pray over the folks going out into the mission field to Africa
Yeah,
or South
yeah.
America, what about me?
Yes.
I'm going into the mission field at 8 a.m. on Monday morning with a lot of unbelievers into a
Exactly.
hostile work environment. Could somebody pray for me too?
Yes.
So that speaks exactly to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I have come to a new understanding and value of just work, period. I think we've gotten pretty good at the redemption commission that God gave us, go into the world and make disciples. But I think we forgot the creation mandate, where God created us, Adam and Eve, in the garden, and he said, I want you to make it flourish and multiply. And in doing that, God values work. I never really, I mean, I knew that. We see him in the, I mean, when God shows up in Genesis 1, what is he doing? He doesn't show up as a pastor or a priest. He shows up with his sleeves rolled up and literally his hands in the dirt making Adam. And he's a worker, and it says he worked those 6 days, and he came to the end of every day, and he said, wow, that was good. That was good. I did a good day's work today.
I like that.
You know? And then, of course, the only thing that wasn't good was Adam was alone, so he created the woman for him. But the whole creation mandate, where God has told us to reproduce and cause the world to flourish. I think what happened is that God created Adam and Eve in the garden, and the garden had limited geographic boundaries. He created the world, and then in that world he created this garden, and he gave it to Adam and Eve. And I think his mandate to them was, see this garden? I want you to make the rest of the world look like this. And to do that, you're going to have to multiply and create and cause this world to flourish. And he's never rescinded that mandate to us. So just doing a good, honest day's work, I think, not only brings pleasure but honor to God, because he created his workers. Jesus,
Both men and women, wouldn't you
both
say?
men and women. Yes, they were in partnership there. I mean, he gave the command to Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. And absolutely. And work is all through this scriptural text. The one that comes to mind for me is Jesus. He goes, before he goes to the cross, he's in the garden and he prays that great high priestly prayer. And he said, Father, I finished the work you gave me to do. And so work has a very high priority in God's thinking. And I think we need to value that. Therefore, we need to value the work that people do. And so when I think of people going into the mission field, the marketplaces, the mission field, I don't just mean cubicle evangelism.
Right.
I mean that they go there as God's children to do a good job that day. And in doing that good job, they reflect the God who created them in his image. He was a worker, created us in his image, therefore we are to be workers. And that's men and women. And I think just doing that brings incredible honor and glory to God. So you're right. When people leave church on Sunday morning, are they connecting Sunday with Monday?
Right.
Are they waking up Monday morning saying, oh no, what a terrible day, I got to go back to work? Or are they saying, I'm getting to go to my ministry today. My ministry's at the office.
And using my Ephesians 2:10 calling
Exactly.
set of gifts that the Lord has given me from birth
Exactly.
to go out and do this work
Yes.
and be a reflection of Jesus
Exactly.
in the workplace.
We're his
Absolutely.
workmanship created in Christ Jesus.
Yes, we talk a lot about that, Diane and I, and the
Yeah.
leaders of Forward, because
Yeah.
we believe very clearly in giftedness, and that the Lord shows specific skills and gifts and abilities for each of us from before time. And so if we can take those into the workplace and use them for his glory by demonstrating his love and his hard work and his grace, then that's our job.
You know, that word in Ephesians 2:10, workmanship, is a pretty unique word in the Bible. It's really the word poema, which is poem, where we get our word poem from. And it's only used twice in the New Testament. It's used once in Romans 1 when he's talking about creation. From the creation of the world, you can see everything you need to know about God to draw you to him. The only other time it's used is about us. We are his workmanship. We are his unique work of art. Each one of us is his unique work. Each one of us is a poem that God wrote.
Wow, you're ministering to me
And
today.
we get
That's
to
amazing.
and we get to be that to the world where we go and minister. And what an incredible way to go to work in the morning, knowing you're God's poem. And they may, what is it that Paul says? You may be the only book they read. Your life. So.
And now
I
we
think
know that
just
it's
brings-
poetry.
It's poetry,
It's
and
beautiful.
they're all unique. every one of us is unique. Aren't two of us alike? So, yeah.
Well, and as Diane and I talk about women in the workplace, and as she mentioned, we're now crossing over that 50% of American workforce is made up of women. 50%. So we look out in our churches and who's sitting in the pew, and we think, okay, she doesn't look like she did 70 years ago. Yet we talk about that she's sort of camouflaged, right? Because she's got kids with her, and maybe she's with friends or maybe with a husband, and so it's very hard for the pastor to know, who are these women and what makes them up. And so we think that if we don't minister to our women in the church in general, but specifically those workforce women that may not be hearing things that apply to them, that they're really going to sort of get picked off by other people. That's why we are really passionate about keeping women in the local church. We love the local church. We both grew up in it. Our joke was, if the door was open, we were there, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so, how do you feel? Do you agree with that? That we need to understand this changing demographic and speak to her, because if not, she's really going to be spoken to by somebody else.
Absolutely. I think not only do we need to recognize the value in women as we do in men, we need to see people as valuable creations of God, and we need to celebrate who they are and who God made them to be. And by that I mean, I think the truth that people go away with is not nearly so much what we say, but what we celebrate. So you mentioned earlier, when someone is going to the mission field on a short-term mission, whether it's a man or a woman, we bring them up front and we pray for them and we equip them, and we often raise funds for them to be able to do that for 1 or 2 weeks out of the year. But what about the other 50 weeks of the year? When do we ever pray for them in that context? When do we ever bring our business leaders up and say, we want to pray for you that you will be the kind of businessman and business leader that really honors and glorifies God? When do we bring school people up? We do that probably more than any other in September, although we usually limit it to teachers before they go back to school for their school year. When do we bring the janitors of the school up? Everybody in education, and just pray for them, celebrate what they do, and for every different aspect of the marketplace, to bring those folks up and celebrate what they do, and pray for them and honor them for what they do as ministers of God, and what they do, I think is very important. But more to your point, I think when there's a need in the church, for instance, to a committee to explore some issue that needs to be explored, who do we think of first to welcome onto that team? Do we actually poll some folks who might know the congregation better than we do and say, I'm looking for some people, not just men, but I'm looking for people with these qualifications, with this kind of expertise that could help us work on this issue together, and broaden our thinking to include everyone in that possibility, to use their expertise.
And I think that's why we see, as we go across America speaking to women in church that are in the workforce, we hear a lot of women that are lonely. They feel isolated. They don't feel spoken to. They don't feel integrated into their church. Some say they go late and leave early because they don't feel like they have a place to plug in. Diane, why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to share a few stories to really have this come to light. The second person I'll bring up is a single woman, and she's in her 30s, and she lives in Dallas, Texas, and she actually had the opportunity to be an usher in her church. And again, a very bright woman with a very, she's doing great in her career in commercial real estate. And one day someone asked her, well, why are you an usher? Where's your husband? You know how that made her feel.
In a shameful way,
yeah.
really.
It was very, very tough. So there's a woman who is 30 and under single.
You know, as I didn't get married till I was 36, and so it is very hard to be single. I always say after you age out of that college age single group, it's kind of creepy for you to keep going, right? But yet you don't belong in the young marrieds or the young parents or, you know, the grade school kids. You don't belong in any of these other buckets, and so you're sort of out in no man's land. And I know in particular I resonate with that story, Diane. I felt a lot of shame that I was there as a single professional woman. Like, what are you doing? Go make a family.
Right,
Right.
exactly. And then Sandra and I actually had lunch with two women, and I wanted to share the first two stories because they were intentional about still being a part of their church family. We had lunch with two women we didn't know well. We were sharing the Forward story with them, and both of the women at the end said, well, we need to share with you, we'd love to be a part of Forward and be a part of that authentic community, but we both don't attend our churches anymore. And so we went into the questions of why, and it was all about feeling relevant, their gifts being used, when the programming was happening, where they fit in. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity, and you know, with podcasts and a lot of things that are happening, I mean, it is so wonderful for me when I'm not in Portland to be able to download the podcast from the preacher that I have the opportunity to hear here when I'm getting ready in the morning in Dallas, Texas. So it's just amazing how this woman is looking for even church on demand, to be able to really encourage and inspire them throughout their crazy day.
And it was interesting. Both those women said, we started out in church, and the more successful I became in my career and the older my children got, I could send my children to Christian school and they could get that Christian community there. And then my husband and I read our Bible together, and that sort of, because we said, what replaced church? What replaced being in the Word for you? And it was very interesting because you know, they saw Christian school replacing it for their children, and them sort of doing, you know, couple, either a Bible study or reading scripture, praying together, replacing the local church. And that's painful for us. You know, I'm sure that gives you a little ping in your heart too, because we believe that that's troubling. That's troubling, because if those children don't come up seeing that purposeful integration to a local church, you know, every generation that goes by, that's going to become, you know, more concerning. But both those women said, I don't feel spoken to when I'm at my church. I don't feel the message pertains to me. I don't feel like I'm acknowledged for my gifts. You know, the programming for women is during the week at 10 a.m. when I'm in the office. So they had all these really rational reasons.
That's a huge, very practical issue that needs to be addressed in some churches, that things that are there for women that they could benefit from are at times when working women can't even be there.
Absolutely.
I was so thrilled at last church that I was part of, before I got there actually, they had 3 women's Bible studies, and one was for stay-at-home moms, and one was for working women. They did the same thing, but basically in the evening, and the other one was at a different time where, you know, it was flexible for either one. And I was excited about that because they had thought about that issue. I think some of this might get down to the issue of respect and value. I think there's a need for for every pastor. I don't know what the need is for everyone, but it would vary from one to the other. But to recapture the respect that Jesus had for women. I just think Jesus is an incredible example to us, and his attitude toward women in a culture where women, we may be seeing a similar culture coming out of the Mideast today. I'm not sure it was that dramatic, but it might have been when Jesus was around. But you know, in a culture where it was thought that women couldn't even learn, Jesus took them as his disciples and taught them. In a culture that they weren't taught. In a culture where women were never valued to the point where they could ever be a witness in a courtroom. Isn't it interesting that Jesus has a woman be the first witness to his resurrection
Mhm.
and go and tell his disciples that I'm alive. And all through the biblical text, he noticed and he valued women. One of the great stories is the woman with the issue of blood who had to sneak through a crowd to just touch him, and he noticed her, and he called her daughter. He valued her as a woman, and he did that over and over again. Even on the cross, he thinks of his mother, who's gonna take care of my mom.
Mhm. And he did amazing things. The woman at the
Incredible
well in
respect. Yes,
Samaria. I mean,
yes.
that's the one that's most touching to me.
Yes.
Because not only was she Samaritan, but
Right.
she was a woman, and she had led a life that wasn't
Yeah.
exactly approved of by her village. But yet he lifted her up, and he
Exactly.
chose her
Exactly.
to be the one to go to that village
Yes,
and deliver
yes,
that message.
exactly.
I think absolutely.
So I think recapturing that would go a long way.
Mhm.
I would encourage pastors to talk to their wives
Mhm.
about some of these things. I know my wife has been probably the greatest benefit to me as a pastor of anybody in the world.
And you've only been married 47 years.
47
so
years.
You're in
and,
the long training
she's
plan.
just one of those amazing women who who teaches on women's issues here at Western Seminary. But she has communicated the value to me for women, and that has been huge. And I'm not sure pastors, even when they're preparing their sermons, if they would run some things by their wife or some other women. I've known pastors who gathered a group of people together every week from all the different aspects of life to say, here's what I'm going to say. How does it come across to you?
Mhm.
And just even thinking about that, the language they use, the illustrations they use. Do most of them end up with he and him, or is there ever as many she and her in the illustrations that they use? Even the biblical language they read. We've gone home from church at times in the car, and Bev said, well, I guess that sermon wasn't for me because all he ever talked about was him and he.
It's interesting. We hear
And
that
even
a lot.
the text he read, and even to have not just gender neutral but gender inclusive language. I mean, I know pastors who will read it and it says brothers when it really means brothers and sisters, and they'll correct it later. So why don't they just use a text that says that to start with? Those things I think communicate huge
And it's so
huge
small.
value.
It's
and
a
it's
little
so
thing.
small. It's so easy to do.
But huge.
But you have to think about it and deliberately do it, not to be PC, but to value women as God values women.
Yeah.
To value women as Jesus valued women, and to let them know that in every way you can.
Well, and that's what gives us hope, really. What you're
Yeah.
saying now is there's great hope out there. You know, one of the challenges we see for workplace women is finding mentors that can not only speak to them corporately in their careers, but also come alongside them and be a biblical church mentor. You know, I think of myself as a new wife. I had an amazing mentor in the church, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and I had another mentor for my career that was a man. And so, you know, coming inside a church and thinking about discipleship making,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Discipleship and disciple making of women in the workforce. I mean, if we can turn up the spotlight and empower those women within the church, think of the rebirth that could happen.
Well, it's Titus 2. And one of the things that Bev likes to point out from Titus 2 is that Paul tells Titus, you're to teach the older men and the younger men and the older women, but he never tells Titus to teach the younger women. He says the older women are to teach the younger women. So if we're losing these incredibly valuable women from the church just because they're not being valued, who's going to teach the younger women coming up?
That's right.
I mean, we're going to get a huge gap there.
That's right.
And I think we're losing a very significant asset.
We're very passionate about
the church.
mentorship and
Yeah,
discipleship,
yeah.
And I know we'll talk about
Yeah.
that more in some other videos. But you know, I have to say, as I sit and I listen to you talk, you know, from a high level perspective, I do have a lot of hope. You know, you, an amazing pastor for all those years, and your wife is a pastor's wife for all those years. You see it, and you're raising awareness, and really that's what we want this video series to do, is to just shine the light on the statistics and the demographics, say there's been this incredible shift, let us tell you about that, and then let us tell you what that's sort of causing. You know, some studies show 27% of professional women are leaving the church. And as you said, they take their families and they're tithing with them when they go. And so we want to keep them in the church so those kids stay there, so their marriages flourish, so they can disciple other people, so they can be that mission-filled Monday through Friday.
I think it would be a very helpful thing for most pastors and church leaders if they would just ask some women, how do I come across to you? When I preach, do you feel valued in this church? What would make you feel valued? And just ask.
Right.
You know what I mean? Rather than assume.
So that's a very practical thing they can do. We talked about
ask.
programming,
Listen,
right? Making the
yes,
programming a certain time.
Yep.
And then I love that idea, asking
Just
women,
ask.
whether it's their wife or women on church staff, or getting together almost a little focus group and saying,
And make sure you ask a variety of people, not just the ones who will give you the answers you
they want
want
to hear. That's right. That's
Sometimes
right.
we ask the wrong questions because we like the answers we get.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Well,
And
I
really,
think,
even some women that have left,
Exactly.
you know, that they still have
Exactly.
a relationship with, to really learn from them.
Do
You
some
know,
exit interviews.
exactly. We do exit interviews in corporate America.
Yeah.
Let's do an exit interview within the church.
Yeah.
Why is that family not coming
Yes.
back? Give us the blunt, between the eyes feedback. So we talked about shifts in programming. We talked about shifts in language.
Language
I
is
think, which
huge.
is a big one. And along with that, I also will often say visuals. Right, a church's website, for example, or you know the pictures you might be using during the message, or
Banners
the videos,
and-
banners, and the church
Yeah.
flyer, all of that. Be very cognizant of it,
Right.
because I assure you that women that
Are
woman
aware
is
of it.
very aware. And then so programming, language and image, and the focus group idea of bringing those people together and saying, hey, this is what I'm going to preach on Sunday. What do you think? Or what do you hear from
What do you
me?
hear? Yeah.
Or why did you leave? Those sorts of two-way communication.
Right.
And then I think the fourth thing is really constantly learning.
Yes,
You know,
being a learner, a lifelong learner in this area as well as every other area of life.
Absolutely.
It's never too late.
Well, we've talked a lot about shifting demographics
Yep.
and some challenges that is causing in today's local church. And we're here, Diane, Jim, and I. We're going to be talking to women throughout this video series. We're going to talk to pastors throughout this video series who have faced some of these challenges and have dealt with them head on and are doing amazing things in their local church. And we're going to continue to bring as much information as we can jam pack into you. So please stay tuned. And thanks so much for your time. And she's there, so look closer.